morning, everyone. I'm Joanna Groark. I am the Director of Public Engagement and Library Exhibitions Curator here at the New York Botanical Garden. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here today and to introduce our guest speaker, Mika Yoshitake. I'm going to start with a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. Today, you are joining us for a webinar, which means that your cameras and mics have been muted. You're still encouraged, though, to participate in today's event. If you would like to make a comment or if you're having any technical issues, please use the chat feature that you can see at the bottom of your screen. And I see a few of you have already said good morning and hello in the chat, which is wonderful. If you need any assistance, our education manager, Jason Griffith, will be facilitating for us today and he'll be helping out. You're encouraged to ask questions. If you'd like to ask Mika a question, please use the Q&A module also found at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to enter your question at any time throughout the lecture. There's no need to wait until the very end. If you see an interesting question pop up that you would really love to see answered, please go ahead and like it. The liked questions will automatically move up in the feed, and that will help us to ensure that we answer the most popular questions. Closed captioning is being provided for this lecture. To enable English language captioning, please click the CC/live transcription button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And then you can click show subtitles, or if you prefer to hide them, you can click hide subtitles to remove them from your screen. This event is also being recorded and it will be available in our lecture library in the coming months. And now I'm very happy to introduce our guest curator for Kusama Cosmic Nature, Mika Yoshitake. Mika is an independent curator with expertise in post-war Japanese art. As curator at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, she organized the North American tour of Yayoi Kusama Infinity Mirrors, which premiered in 2017. She's currently guest curator at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art for the international tour of Yoshitomo Nara and Pacific Standard Time 2024's Breathe toward climate and social justice at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. It's been wonderful to work with Mika over the past several years to organize our current exhibition here at NYBG. We are in for a treat this morning as she presents today on some of the key concepts that are underpinning this historic exhibition, and I'm sure you'll all really enjoy it. I am very pleased now to turn it over to Mika.
Thank you, Joanna. It's been a pleasure working on this exhibition with you through this unprecedented pandemic, which has really, affected all of us. And we're so relieved that the show is finally open to the public when the cherry blossoms are in full bloom. And so eye-opening to see Kusama's work both activate and be activated by the Botanical Garden, and it will be a true delight to see how this dialogue develops as the seasons change. So I would like to begin, this lecture is actually drawn from my catalog essay for the exhibition. And I would like to begin with two quotes from the 1980s by two philosophers who saw Kusama's distinct relationship to the natural world. First is Felix Guattari. Before our eyes, Kusama has returned as a great contemporary artist who creates the most unfathomable emotions of the future. And the second is by Shinichi Nakazawa, philosopher and anthropologist. Affect spreads out of her. Overwhelmed by illusion and fear, the affect machine, Yayoi Kusama, continues to turn her jack towards a cosmic nature. In her case, her jack is deeper than anyone else. She herself is nature. In 1987, Yayoi Kusama presented a series of soft, otherworldly psychosexual sculptures, including Summer 2 and Sleeping Stamens, at the Kitakyushu Municipal Museum of Art, which was her first survey exhibition since she returned to Japan in 1973. The genealogy of these monstrous botanical creatures and white tentacles contained inside multiple boxes can be traced to a much earlier sculpture, My Flower Bed from 1962, in which a wild flower head made of hundreds of spray painted fire red gloves hovers over the artist, a carnivorous plant about to swallow her. In his essay, Jodo Shokubutsu, or Le Végétaux Affectif, or affective plants for the exhibition catalog, philosopher Shinichi Nakazawa asserts the importance of botanical forms in Kusama's work, describing the role of nature in her practice as one tied to human affect. Citing Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's theory of colors, Nakazawa defines affect as, quote, a productive activity that occurs when nature in general is embodied in a special form of human nature. There's an even larger cosmic nature at work hidden inside the affect machine of humans, end quote. Affect is the way we experience, connect, and make sense of the world and its aftermath. Nakazawa employs the key philosophical concept of affect to define Kusama's vision of nature as something that is not objectified through representation, but embodied through a visceral transformation that connects the botanical world to the tactile sensations of human nature and even to the sublime feeling of cosmic expansion. This key concept of affect helps us understand Kusama's central artistic strategy as linking nature, mankind, and the cosmos. From her earliest botanical sketches of the 1940s to her present-day outdoor flower sculptures, nature is the pivotal concept in Kusama's artistic practice, which consistently refers to patterns of organic growth and the biological cycles of life and death. Nature is not a mere source of inspiration, but integral to the visceral effect of her artistic language. Herein lies Kusama's life force, a cosmic nature that integrates terrestrial and celestial orders of the universe and signals an ethical stance, a lifelong journey of embracing the unknown, nature, the universe, infinity, death, in order to form a radical interconnectivity, a central theme in the artist's philosophy of self-obliteration that equalizes nature, humans, and the cosmos. While there have been many efforts to interpret Kusama's practice as an art historical enigma, the artist has staunchly positioned herself both within and outside its vernaculars of Nihonga, Japanese-style painting, yoga, Western-style painting, surrealism, abstract expressionism, minimalism, group zero and Dutch null, assemblage, installation, pop, performance, expanded cinema, and immersive environments. In efforts to classify her work, the consistent presence of organic life is most often overlooked. For Kusama, nature is alive in a perpetual cycle of becoming, disintegration, and rebirth, and part of a larger cosmos. Throughout her life, she has illustrated both microcosmic and macrocosmic views of the universe, from her amoebic works on paper, to her biomorphic assemblages and sculptures, to infinitely expansive mirrored installations. What is the relationship of these cosmic scale shifts to nature and organic growth? How do her works embody the unique affects that we sense through our experiences in nature? Within the context of a botanical garden, Kusama's art takes on new meaning. Three concepts which I would like to explore in this lecture are anthropomorphism, faciality, and the biocosmic. Kusama wrote, "There are 10 billion bubbles inside my body, which is precisely why I feel at one with the 10 billion stars that twinkle in the heavens, and why I talk to the clouds made up of 10 billion tiny drops of water, and why I hear the voice of the wind carrying 10 billion atoms." In 1957, on the occasion of her first exhibition in Seattle of works on paper, she was interviewed by a local newspaper, and she said, quote, "My home is Matsumoto, a mountain village 200 miles northwest of Tokyo. I live with the forest, the birds, the insects, the streams, and the things of the earth. I have always lived this way, and I always shall. When I wish to paint a bird, I try to place myself inside the character of the bird and speak as I imagine the bird would speak. I do the same for a rock, a fish, a tree. So you see, I talk to you and others through my paintings. If you understand what I'm trying to say, then you have heard me speak. Plants entered Kusama's subconscious as a child. She was born in the mountainous central Japanese prefecture of Nagano, known for abundant root vegetables and mushrooms, and grew up in her maternal grandparents' massive seed nursery. She recalls her first encounter with a pumpkin when she visited the seed nursery as a child. Pumpkins grew amid fields of zinnias and periwinkles. She thrust her hands through rows of zinnias and pulled out a pumpkin by its stem. She was immediately fascinated by the pumpkin's anthropomorphically large head, recalling that it had begun to speak to her with all its might, and she felt drawn to the pumpkin's winsome form, in particular its fat belly and unadorned features, and its burly psychological power. She remembers feeling an endearment when touching its surface with her hands, the sensation of sap droplets oozing out of this freshly separated stem. Later, Kusama spent a month depicting a single pumpkin, likening the experience to the process of Dharma's enlightenment, while in Kyoto training in traditional Nihonga Japanese-style painting. Kusama, like other progressive post-war artists, was drawn to the power of plants as a vital life force. Organic life was highly symbolic for both surrealist and Nihonga painters alike, who sought in different ways to overcome chaos and nihilism in the aftermath of World War II. Quote, "The veins of a leaf, grain of a tree, exotic patterns of southern succulents, and expressions of tree barks were a site of competition for artists' originality and expression. Plants mediated Nihonga and surrealist type expressions and reflected themes of transformation and change," end quote. Lingering Dream from 1949, one of Kusama's final Nihonga paintings, depicts dry and withered sunflowers in a stark red desert, which one may perceive as symbolic of the dire conditions of food scarcity and desperation during World War II. Working outside the confines of Nihonga standards of national beauties, such as peonies in full bloom or chrysanthemums in flower and the like, Kusama experimented with an individualized abstraction during a time when expression preceded representation and colors were preferred over the technical facility of outlines. Kusama's unique development during this time consists of an anthropomorphic process in which plants take on a distinct animality or human quality. In an early oil painting, Self-Portrait from 1950, a dark sunflower with bluish pink petals floats in the center of a dark abyss with broken concentric lines that swirl around it like a vortex. A pair of closed lips in the same flesh pink hue turns the flower into an otherworldly faceless head. This is a significant shift from the stark surreal desertscape of Lingering Dream. In Self-Portrait, the shifting of images between a figurative flower and an abstract human face points to a dark apparition that is activated through a heightening of senses. One can see a fishnet-like layer underneath the face, what would eventually be known as Kusama's signature infinity net on the right. Kusama turns the sunflower into a site of raw affect, where its face takes on a human emotion in much the same way the artist would often place herself inside the character of a rock, a fish, or a tree, becoming a flower and seeking through her work to communicate as she imagined these things of the earth would speak. Like a ghost, this anthropomorphic emergence subsequently reappears in other paintings, such as The Bud on the left, which was painted on jute seed bags. The cubist shape of the bud, where its parts are reduced to barely perceptible geometric fragments on the dark ground plane, appears as if it is about to break through the surface of its fetal shell-like form. In these early experiments, Kusama plays with the surrealist strategy of doubling, the oscillation between two appearances that relies on the threshold between emergence and disappearance. This is predominant in Accumulation of Plants, or Accumulation of Corpses on the right, a painting on canvas featuring thick, tightly braided hair-like ropes emerging in the foreground before a distant fence, which may be interpreted as a reference to the US Allied occupation in Japan between 1945 and 1952. The spiraling lines simultaneously conjure aggressive growth patterns of stems, tree bark, or gnarled roots, which emerge as abstract expressions of fear, rage, desperation, and residual violence that lay submerged within the silent and barren landscape of war's aftermath. Kusama's repeated use of the term accumulation in the title of several paintings produced that year, including Earth of Accumulation, in which tentacles emerge from a barren field, and the accumulation of corpses, prisoners surrounded by the curtain of depersonalization. These works attest to her interest in accumulation itself as a living organism and a slowly accruing outburst of raw human emotion that have become uncontrollable as one faces the ends of the earth. Art historian Izumi Nakajima has recently described how Kusama's writings at the time critique the hierarchical power of Japanese art critics who looked down on her work as stereotypically feminine, describing it as, quote, a direct expression based on bodily sensation, end quote. Taking critics to task, Kusama shifted dramatically between 1952 and 55, particularly in her works on paper, which Nakajima divides into three categories: automatic drawings in which she used bold ink gestures, works deploying all over dots and organic symbolic imagery, and works featuring a balance of mystic spatial depth and emerging organic elements. Kusama felt a resonance between the mystic qualities of her own work and that of American artists based in the Pacific Northwest, such as Morris Graves and Mark Tobey, recognizing that, quote, their power is in their search for the eternal liberation of the psyche, end quote. Compared to her early paintings, her works on paper employ a less heavy-handed approach in favor of an airy, kinetic shifting or coexistence of organic forms that seem to alternate between abstraction and discernible living forms. This is explored in several works on paper, such as A Seed on the left, in which an eye doubles as a seed on a face, and The Night, which you see on the right, where a floating orb surrounded by red dotted particles doubles as a pulsating heart. Through this anthropomorphic treatment of plant life, Kusama's early visceral paintings are dark expressions of apparition, premonition, and emotion. Yet we also witness a marvelous embrace of light, a celestial nature that integrates the earthly and the cosmic. Faciality. Polka dots are the face of affect. Affective nature, which of course is a complex act of production invisible to the eye, is a face that outcrops from the world of vision, and a multitude of faces are abstracted into the eye of the polka dot net. This is where the phenomenon of visceral or faciality that lies hidden at the root of art is taking place. The work of affect, which is not visible to the eye, becomes visible. And because distance is introduced inside consciousness, an original fissure is formed between affect and consciousness. Kusama's production of infinity nets from polka dots attempts to capture that moment when the faciality of affective nature appears. Kusama's polka dots originated from a hallucination that the artist experienced as an adolescent, in which she saw red flower patterns on a tablecloth spreading out from her body onto the environment surrounding her. Quote, with the whole room, my whole body, and the whole universe covered entirely with flower patterns, I would self-obliterate, be buried in the infinitude of endless time and the absoluteness of space, and be reduced to nothingness, end quote. In order to confront this vision of proliferation, it manifested into an uncontrollable artistic production and labor of repetition, especially in Kusama's works on paper and paintings from the late 1950s entitled Interminable Nets or Infinity Nets. Recalling the waves of the Pacific Ocean that she witnessed on her flight from Japan to Seattle in 1957, These works developed later into her signature infinity nets in New York from 1958 to 73. The infinity net is not a chaotic mass, but an orderly logic that rhythmically proliferates to fill the canvas, forming the negative space of her polka dots. When considering the anthropomorphic quality of Kusama's early organic works, a related phenomenon introduced here by Nakazawa as faciality emerges in the artist when she develops her infinity net paintings. Originally derived from a concept developed by philosopher Gilles Deleuze and psychoanalyst Felix Guattari, the term refers to the power of facial images in which multiple modes of affect occur, producing a feeling of intensity. Nakazawa employs the term to refer to the life force that lays embedded in the abstract network of Kusama's motifs, which, not unlike a facial expression, brings forth a much larger complex entity. Many of Kusama's contemporaries associated with minimalism, light, and space, and the late 1960s post-war Japanese art movement, monoha, engaged with the idea of the dot, like Robert Irwin and Bridget Riley, who were interested in the haptics of optical perception, as well as Liu Fan, whose conception of the dot, or ten, marks time, the beginning and end of the universe, while Jiro Takamatsu's notion of the dot, or ten, centered on physics. Kusama's polka dot is analogous to an index of trained pressure points felt in peripheral areas of the body that are interconnected with cosmic life. The polka dot can be perceived not as a single flat circular form, but instead as a complex, boundless spherical entity on the verge of explosive expanse, like a sun. Nakazawa states, quote, Kusama's ability to make us feel like there is a universal life in her polka dots is undoubtedly due to the way she touches upon the essence of an anomalous logic that brings forth an effective life, end quote. One is able to visually perceive this face of energy in Kusama's early works on paper, such as The Night, in which an infinity net appears inside an orb that radiates with red dots, or Untitled, depicting a chain of black dots that dangles into and around a fuchsia-like tubular flower covered with tiny white dots. In later collage works, like Flower Petals on the right, the face emerges as a pink embryonic cell that floats in a glowing red net containing what looks like images of fossilized butterfly wings and a hard stone surface. Despite their distinct periods, the works on paper made in the aftermath of war and the collages during one of the darkest periods of her life after her permanent return to Japan in 1973, when she experienced the deaths of her father and her great friend, Joseph Cornell, both bodies of biomorphic works reflect a profound moment in which a fissure between affect and consciousness takes place. We also witness the emergence of this face in her infinity net paintings. Nakazawa points to how the eye of the infinity net holds an eerie twist like Klein's bottle, referring to mathematician Felix Klein's conception of topological space, in which Mobius strips are joined together so that the inner and outer surfaces are continuous and interchangeable. This idea is derived from topology, from the Greek topos, or place, and logi, or study. The mathematical concept of geometric transformation in which space and shape can be continuously expanded, contracted, distorted, and twisted, while the structure of the object remains constant throughout. While Kusama's infinity nets have conventionally been reinterpreted within the context of the sublime monochrome or minimalist abstraction, Nakazawa's notion of the eye of the net introduces an anti-subjective stance in which, rather than the artist generating meaning, the work itself creates a physical experiential affect. This idea is best represented in a double exposure photograph in which a portrait of Kusama is superimposed with an infinity net of dots. Her face and body have been consumed by a pixelated mosaic, that penetrate through and around her like an immersive veil, emerging as a face. Here, Kusama's nets create an effect of stretching beyond the canvas into a multitude of dimensions in which the viewer is immersed inside a topological space. At the apex of Kusama's transformative series from this period is number 3PB, one of the earliest large red infinity net paintings, which Kusama exhibited at the 1961 Whitney Annual in New York. Invited by curator John Gordon, a longtime supporter of Kusama's work, who had previously included her in the International Watercolor Exhibition, 20th Biennale of 1959 at the Brooklyn Museum, this work comprises a breakthrough of interconnected arcs that spread indefinitely beyond the edge of the canvas. It is possible to discern waves of dense foam undulating beneath the surface, each flowing in a different direction, its face emerging as a glowing red halation, like cosmic light about to encapsulate the viewer. The infinity nets evolved in the 1980s and 1990s. Kusama's paintings and works on paper from this period retain the core element of the infinity net, but they feature botanical themes and titles more explicitly. Small-scale paintings such as Signs of Life from 1987 and Multiplication of Life from 1988 accentuate the cell-like structure of the infinity net. Flower, a collage from 1993, a white-on-black collage depicts a swaying white flower outlined in peach with white leaves patterned with delicate rendering of nets, recalling the hair-like fungal structure of mycelium. Critic Herbert Reed first made reference to mycelium in describing the artist's infinity nets in 1964. The eye of the net is perhaps most clearly pronounced in her etching Pistils and Stamens from 1994, in which black dots, likely pistils, accumulate toward the center of the composition, connected by a filament of stamen-like nets. This centrifugal composition is typical of works from this period that also reference the cosmos, such as Galaxy from 1993. In this work, delicate white microbial hairs radiate outward from a central light source upon which red dots float, triggering the beginning or the end of the world. Weeds from 1996, a large-scale green triptych, features hair-like nets that suggest patterns of raindrops on glass. Rather than a drawn gesture, the dark green expanse and the ephemerality of the wet, slippery web-like forms conjure a base materiality that creeps up one's spine. In this sense, the work succeeds in showing the invisible face of affect as it emerges through a multitude of proliferating weeds. And finally, the last section is the biocosmic. Yayoi Kusama deconstructs materials, forms, colors, and meaning in order to reconstruct a powerful emotion and perspective much deeper than the foundation with which she began. Her selected path towards non-differentiation and displaced accumulations is none other than to engage us more than ever before toward a process of heightened differentiation. Felix Guattari, 1986. In a rare 1984 performance in Infinity, this is actually called Infinity Nets, at Tokyo's Video Gallery Scan, an entitled Kusama ceramic with white stamens entwined in a circular form was displayed on multiple closed-circuit monitors, while the artist drew lines with black markers on the walls and proceeded to wrap participants in white string hung from the ceiling until they were completely entangled. This act of connection was an expression of the philosophy of self-obliteration, espoused by the artist since the 1960s. Intended to free oneself of one's ego and foster experiencing one another as equals. This was a powerful call for peace during the protests against the Vietnam War. In the context of the 1980s, however, the connectivity that is suggested in a live activation of the Infinity Net is juxtaposed to the artist's psychosexual sculptures, where one witnesses a process of deconstructing and then accumulating the reproductive organs of flowers, forming intense organic bodies composed of many repetitive, differentiated forms. Her assemblage boxes shift between floral and vaginal references, such as the white spindly hairs that shroud a central egg-like nest in flower from 1985, and red dotted phallic forms drawn from Infinity Mirrored Valley's Field repertoire from 1965, which reappear enveloping white pistils and red string-like stamens in moonlit bedding. Kusama's 1984 performance can be understood as an expression of her unique vision of and engagement with nature at large. Attributing memory to plants, one may conceive this engagement as biocosmic. Quote, the memory of affect when plants were primordial plants that contained minerals and animals inside itself has not yet been lost. Such biocosmic plants search their own face and stand up toward the light, end quote. Around 2003, Kusama began working on a series of paintings that would lead her to her present-day My Eternal Soul series, in which organic elements, both mineral and animal forms, are employed as recurring biocosmic motifs. The artist uses a bright, at times fluorescent palette and bold outlines. Pumpkin, TWOTEOL from 2004, depicts an octopus-like form in an infinite bed of red arcs. While in Conversations in Heaven, flower heads double as the eyes of two silhouetted faces that meet in the center, flanking a set of blue flowers. The negative spaces of polka dots have morphed into bold tentacles that emanate from a brazen red sun, like a lion dance, in tribute to the sun in the cosmos from 2010. Fern-like forms, suggestive of Japanese sago palm leaves in the prairie of summer, reappear in large scale as leaves borne on a stream of blue water in the path of life. Sunflowers with radiating tentacle-like petals appear in Flowers Speak, and adorned with faces and I Want to Go to the Universe. These form the basis of her new outdoor sculpture, I Want to Fly to the Universe. On view now, a bright purple tentacled floral form that has morphed into a monumental starfish with a primordial face. The title of this work suggests the imaginary desire of the artist, disguised as a fantastic plant animal, taking a lightning speed leap into outer space. Linking human nature to cosmic nature, Nakazawa states that Kusama, quote, stands in a consistent place. That place is one in which nature at large catapults a leap inside human nature, and the moment when human nature is about to take a strange leap towards cosmic nature, end quote. We witnessed this leap across the garden in front of the conservatory, where a 16-foot dancing pumpkin that has morphed into an 11-armed sea creature, a cross between an octopus and a jellyfish, abound with electromagnetic energy, appears. In photographs documenting a 1985 performance, Flowers of Basara, or Extravagance, Kusama stands before a blossoming cherry trees at Kuhonbutsu Joshinji, a large Buddhist temple in Tokyo, wearing a deep red kimono-like garment with oversized sleeves. White streamers encircle her body, extending to the branches of the trees, forming a vast three-dimensional infinity net. Kusama herself becomes the eye of her own infinity net, occupying the threshold between nature and the cosmos. So in the end, Kusama's work, we witnessed three interrelated languages: anthropomorphism, a doubling of forms that take on a human character; faciality, the invisible emergence of a presence in the formation of her polka dots and infinity nets; and finally, the biocosmic, in which mineral and animal-like elements converge with outer space. At the core of Kusama's unique engagement with nature is a radical embrace of the unknown. In Kusama's words, "My momentary life that is supported by some invisible force exists in illusions in a brief moment of quietude of hundreds of millions of endless light years. The self-revolution which I have been pursuing as a means to live was actually a means to find death. What death signifies, its colors and special beauty, the quietude of its footprints and nothingness. After death, I am now at a stage to create art, for the repose of my soul embraces all of these." End quote. In a poignant scene from her 1968 film, Self-Obliteration, Kusama appears wearing a straw fisherman's hat, half submerged in a lake, surrounded by a green forest in Woodstock, New York. Holding a brush, she paints red dots on the surface of the water and continues as each spreads out into tinier droplets, with each ripple one by one. The ephemerality of the dotted paint, its slowly morphing form, and expansion into a larger macrocosm, indexes the artistic fusion of creation and dissolution, the marking and unmarking of time, and the principles of connectedness and an expanded consciousness that lie at the root of Kusama's engagement with the natural world. Kusama's perception of nature is one that adapts the natural cycles of organic growth and proliferation as a means through which cosmic life is made ever present. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mika, for this wonderful talk, for this wonderful examination of some of the major themes that underpin our exhibition. It's clear that our audience is also very fascinated. We have a number of really great questions here. To get us started, I thought I would ask you a couple of questions while we see, and I'm also monitoring the chat and the Q&A at the same time. But to get us started, Mika, could you tell us a little bit about what it is that you think, what drives Kusama's engagement with nature?
Well, what drives Kusama's engagement with nature? It's not, I mean, she of course was born at her family's, and grew up in her family's seed nursery. But I think it's really the cycles of life and decay and death and rebirth that you can see really palpably in nature that she was drawn to. And the visual forms and motifs that you see in her work constantly reference that that very kind of life force that you see in nature. So whether it be the very tentacular forms or these images that kind of double between faces or animals or plants, these are definitely she integrates life so that you can understand it as a kind of interconnection between humans, nature, and the cosmos.
What does it mean to you to present, or what do you think it means to present Kusama's work in the setting of a garden?
I think it's a very unprecedented, but it's been a long time coming. Her work has always been presented. It has been actually presented at a botanical garden, but not in this kind of comprehensive way or manner. And I think you can see how her work is not something that is trying to camouflage itself within nature. It's very distinct. It's very much you see the outlines and forms and the bright palette, but there's something about her work that I think enhances the landscape that it is a part of, and the garden itself helps to enhance her work. Like the beautiful flower pathway that you created, inside the conservatory leading up to the pumpkin. I think that was brilliant. And it really makes you see her work in a completely different lens.
Thank you. As someone who's familiar with Kusama's work and has studied it for a long time, were there any surprises or new discoveries that we made along the way as we were developing the exhibition that were particularly exciting to you?
Yeah, well, I actually even had discoveries while I was installing, like like that self-portrait. I didn't realize there was an infinity net underneath the painting, because you can't see that. I mean, I saw that work at the studio, but I didn't see it close up enough with the light, shining. And that was a fascinating discovery, only because we've seen the dots and the nets on her works on paper, but not in her paintings like that. And I haven't discovered any scholars actually talking about that. So that was a discovery. Also, just the natural light, the sun interacting with some of her sculptures, like Life, the tentacled work installation, as well as Starry Pumpkin, was absolutely wonderful to see. It's, I think we all didn't realize how immaculate it would be, until that we saw the works in the space. Um, and also the large flower sculptures, the steel and FRP sculptures that you see in the um, palm dome, and the reflecting pool with the lotus flowers. Those, just interacting with natural flowers and the greenery. That's something I don't think has really been shown in that kind of environment. I mean, it's just the horticulturalists have done such a great job, and I I previously I felt like these kinds of sculptures were just a form of plop art, or it was just kind of placed. But there is a very profound integration of the work with the landscape there. So that was a nice discovery.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. I think for all of us, the process of working with you and with the artist studio to cite the work has been endlessly fascinating and sort of incredibly rewarding to see how the landscape is enhanced and how the works in turn are imbued with new meaning. It's really wonderful. Thank you. I'm looking at the chat and I'm looking at the Q&A module, and I see I'm going to go ahead and combine a couple of questions. There's a couple of questions about Kusama's polka dots and her influences, and whether we know of any connection to either the European pointillists or, and I've heard this question before too, or the Aboriginal art that we can see in Australia. Do you?
I mean, I have to say that Kusama does not like to point out influences. She's very confident. She even doesn't like me to, when I mention like Joseph Cornell, even though they were very close, she's not very forthcoming about talking about her influences. But I'm sure that she knows about the pointillists and knows about the Aboriginal, the dot paintings. It's just that if you look at her work from the early 50s, like the self-portrait and the works on paper, and you kind of track some of those motifs, she has developed her own aesthetic, and what I've written about this before, but I think she actually her body has its own memory, where she, because her labor is so repetitive, it's almost like she those dots. So some of those infinity net paintings are made from the negative space. So it's not the arcs, it's actually the space in between the arcs, and those are kind of the the polka dots. And you can see that in her My Eternal Soul paintings. You can see that method used in what we saw in the 1980s, some of her smaller canvas paintings, and also in her watercolors in the 70s. And so she was, I think she was very much exposed to a lot of art while she was, living in New York and also traveling throughout Europe. And, she also knew a lot of art critics and went to and frequented museums. But she would never herself say like she's, influenced by. Um, that said, I think that the visionary art of what's kind of, known as this outsider art, I think that that's definitely a subject to explore. Yeah, for sure. Because she, as I mentioned, positions herself both inside and outside the art historic, kind of. Um, she's always very singular, and so it would be interesting. I think there is some connections to this thesis of the cosmic, the cosmic nature, to some of the indigenous, cosmologies.
Right. I think I have a sort of follow-up that is, again, a little bit of a combination of a few questions that I'm seeing, not just about influences on Kusama's work, but also Kusama's influence on other artists. We have a question about how she reacted to some of the appropriation she might have encountered during her time here in New York. There's the stories that we've heard about folks like Warhol and Oldenburg and how they were interested in some of the ideas that she explored. And then we have another question about Yoko Ono and whether her art is influenced by Kusama. But maybe you want to answer that question a little bit more broadly. Are there artists working today or in the past that you think have been influenced by Kusama?
Yeah, absolutely. While she was in New York, there were artists who, she was a Japanese female artist working in a very white male dominant art world in the 60s. And she had tried very hard to get recognized. And she even did these, happenings, performances, and wild. But in the early 60s, she started, she's suffered basically just not sleeping and, making these infinity net paintings. And she started using these silk screens before, and this was, there was a show called 1000 Boat Show. And where she actually made, and Donald Judd, the minimalist artist, actually was living in her building and helped bring in a boat, and she sewed and stuffed these phallic forms all over, the boat. And then she took a picture, and there were, ostensibly 999 silkscreen images of that boat in this installation. And Andy Warhol came, saw the show, and this was before he had started doing the silk screens, and was wow, he was wowed by it. And then subsequently started to make these silk screens. Of course, he got a lot of recognition, and she never did. And so there's a lot of resentment, I think, on Kusama's part. Same thing happened with Klaus Oldenburg, where with his soft sculptures, they were in a group show together at Green Gallery, and Klaus Oldenburg started to make, but you have to think of these as very different. Yes, they are soft sculptures. The forms are the way they are made are similar, but Klaus Oldenburg is operating within the milieu of pop art, and it wasn't, and Kusama wasn't necessarily, I think she was at that time kind of critical of pop art. So there were definitely, it was just influences, dialogues with other artists. There's also at the Jewish Museum a French artist who presented a mirrored installation and got a lot of press. And this was in 1965. And I remember being in Kusama's studio, reading her letters from that time, her archive, writing a letter to New York Times saying, actually, I made my infinity mirror room Falaise Field a couple months before. No one really, she got like one little paragraph mention in a newspaper, but that was it. So I think she definitely was a pioneer, but she just didn't get the recognition, yes, at the time. I think in later years, yeah, I know there are younger artists who have been influenced by her or have been working in the same vein. I wouldn't say influence much as like this immersive environment is, I think, something that some artists have definitely taken on and incorporated into their own practice. Yeah.
I think I'm seeing a number of questions that are, and I think you probably have answered some of these questions in the last couple of weeks. I know I have too, about the process of installing a show of this scale and sort of organizing a show of this scale. So I'm going to answer a couple of them really quickly and then sort of summarize them so that maybe you can speak a little bit about this too, Mika. We were working on this exhibition for about 3 years in planning. And yes, our exhibition was postponed, like many of our colleagues' exhibitions, and much of all of our activity was postponed in the last year. We are enormously grateful and thrilled to have been able to present the exhibition this year. And we made some changes to the checklist and some changes to the presentation of the exhibition to allow for social distancing and to ensure that our visitors feel as comfortable as possible while they're here. But we're really, I think, very fortunate that the exhibition is largely intact and hasn't changed tremendously from what we originally planned. Could you maybe, Mika, share a little bit about what the artists, we work with the artist, we work with her studio. She is not traveling as much as she used to or much at all. So we have a few questions about whether she's seen her show here and how she participates in the organization of exhibitions worldwide.
She hasn't traveled internationally since 2012. She, as most people know, she's in her 90s and she lives very close to her studio. And she's been there since 1977. And she actually has begun to make her work inside the mental hospital where she lives. And so the My Eternal Soul series that you saw actually a lot of them now are made in her bedroom. And on the wall, there are lots of photos of her recent exhibitions or planning, letters, images. So, when I met her back in 2016, she was very, very interested in checklist, the layout, images, and I had a whole like material, and she also was interested in the texts. Like everything had to be translated into Japanese. For this show, yeah, she has her staff, coming morning and night updating her. So she knows exactly what's in the show. Everything has to go through her. And the large scale sculptures were actually, we discussed it with the studio. They're maquettes that she made. I think, like over 10 years ago or so. And so we chose from those maquettes, what we wanted to exhibit. And of course, she has to approve. And then the title of the show, I think you remember, she had a very strong opinion about it. So that was, and then it was originally Japanese, and then of course we translated it, and that triggered a lot, the cosmic nature. You know, it wasn't just the natural world, and so and I think it's one of the few titles that doesn't have infinity, you know, or infinite. So yeah, does that answer?
I think so. Yes, it's been, for all of us here at the garden, it's been a privilege to work with Mika, with the artist and her studio, to bring this project to fruition. It's really been an incredible collaborative approach,
Yeah.
which has been great. I'm looking to see if we have any more questions that we want to answer. We're getting close to time. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know that there's a few people asking for resources and asking about, you know, sort of good surveys of information about her work. So of course, our exhibition catalog for this project will be available in June. And there are a number of excellent resources out there, including the catalog for Mika's previous exhibition, Infinity Mirrors, exhibition catalogs on Kusama abound, books and articles on Kusama abound, and we recommend some of these recent catalogs that are really excellent. And I think we're kind of reaching the end. It's impossible to answer everyone's questions. We thank you all so much for joining us today, for your enthusiasm. I wish we could stay here for longer and answer every single question. I would like to thank Mika, of course, for her time today and for all of her efforts on behalf of the garden to organize this exhibition. If you haven't already made plans to visit, I hope you will. Our tickets are available at the link in the chat. Our exhibition catalog will be coming out in a few weeks. And I encourage you also to take a look at our website. Our adult education team curates an amazing array of talks and events that are sure to be enjoyable, and there's always something to do here at NYBG. So thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you, Mika.